My name's Nancy. Good morning, everybody. My name's Nancy Lockwood. I am the co-director and practice lead of the AFCCA Family Supports Program at Adopt for Life. We're going to be talking about what AFCCA stands for. We're really glad you have joined us today. This is a discussion we really need to have with the justice community. We've been having these presentations for multiple sectors with a goal of us all collaborating and working together to support families experiencing aggression in the home. So next slide, please. Just to give you a picture of who we are, I'm going to let our two presenters introduce themselves, but this is our team at Adopt for Life. We're a new program that just launched this year, funded by the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services here in Ontario. So we also have Jen Drudge, who's our parent liaison, offering peer support to families experiencing AFCCA. And Tanya, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tanya Eichler, and actually, like the people you're seeing here, I'm from the Ottawa area. I am a psychotherapist in Ottawa and came from British Columbia about 9 years ago. I specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and adoption. I'm an adoptee, early childhood trauma and attachment problems. And so, yeah, I got to join. The three of us helped create the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program in Ottawa. And I got to join the AFCCA program as it got started as well last summer.
And now, Maude, if you'd introduce yourself, please, and then we just have a few housekeeping items, a land acknowledgement, and we will get going. So Maude.
Oh, yes, I just realized I was muted. Thank you. So similarly to Tanya, I specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and now AFCCA. I also helped launching the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program here. I am a psychotherapist, social worker, and with Nancy and Tanya, we launched this program last summer. And I'm also a parent of 5 children. 3 came to me by adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Maude. So we'd like to share a land acknowledgement. All of us who are presenting today work and live on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Maude lives just north of the beautiful Ottawa River, which just thawed. I can see it out my window, and Tanya and I live just south of it. We recognize the Algonquin people as the customary keepers and defenders of this beautiful Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries, and we honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory that we now know as our National Capital Region. Many of you joining us today live and work on other traditional Indigenous unceded territories, and we invite you to join us in taking a moment to reflect on and acknowledge this. And just a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice there's both the chat and a question and answer function. Feel free to write in the chat as we go along, but please know what you write in the chat is public. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function. You can write questions anonymously. If it's something that is really pertinent to what the presenters are speaking about, I will interject with your question. Otherwise, we'll save the Q&A for the end. We do have a closed captioning function, so if you would prefer to use captions, you'll see you can just click on Show Captions at the bottom. And with that, I will pass it over to the presenters. Thank you.
Could you move the slide, Tanya? Thank you. So a few years ago, while we were working with families who raise children and youth with FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a lot of families were sharing with us the experience of aggression that was displayed by their children. When I say children, I'm including the youth. And throughout my PhD, I also did a research asking families, what are you experiencing during COVID with your child? And due to the loss of routine, loss of mental health support, loss of structure, a lot of the children were getting more anxious, and that led to an increase in aggressive behaviors. So this is something that Adopt for Life was also seeing quite a bit. And I'm associated as a researcher with Kids Brain Health Network. And this is something that we were also wanting to address because that's what we heard from families. So we launched this big national consultation. So throughout the countries, most provinces were represented. And we asked families, what are you experiencing? What does it look like? And the idea was to give this issue a name and to start thinking about some of the solutions we can bring. We also had not only families, we had policymakers on the table, we had the justice sectors from police officers, we also had probation officers, and academia, therapists. It was quite diverse. And then one of the main things we wanted to address is how we were going to call it. So when we looked around the globe, how people call it, it's called CPVA, so child to parent violence. Some people use child to parent abuse, but many of the families, many of the therapists felt like, okay, that's not necessarily an ethical word to use. So we actually did a consultation and we came up with this name, aggression towards family and caregivers in childhood and adolescence. We also want to say sometimes it happens also in adulthood, so it might become entrenched, but for the sake of our program, we had to focus on minors. Also, this is a pattern of behaviors that happens during that developmental stage. And what it looks like is physical and verbal aggression. And it's usually directed towards caregivers, but that can also become entrenched, and that could also be directed towards people in the community. Yeah, you can switch to the next slide. So during the consortium, we also asked, what does it look like in their home? So as you can see here, sometimes it's even directed towards the pets, sometimes it's the grandparents if they live with them, and sometimes it's a self-harm or threat to self-harm, like saying, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to cut or I'm going to kill myself. And this is a type of self-harm that is more typical of AFCCA, whereas this is something that is used for control. Also, a lot of them were saying, the intensity is like an 8 out of 10 and sometimes higher. And 76% said they were experiencing daily or weekly those episodes of violence or aggression. The swearing is often included, but we wouldn't say that a child who only swears, it wouldn't qualify as AFCCA. We need a pattern of behaviors that is increasing danger or safety issue for the whole family or for themselves. I think we can switch to the next one. What we also see is that it doesn't come from nowhere, like the children and youth who display AFCCA do have neurodevelopmental disabilities. So many of them had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, some had ADHD, but it usually was along with, several mental health diagnoses. It was mostly children who were highly complex. Many of them had been traumatized, were coming from the foster care system, for example, attachment issues, difficulty with communication. And when we share that, we don't want to say that anyone you will encounter who has autism or FASD will be aggressive. That's not what we're saying. But certainly having a neurodevelopmental disability leads to difficulty regulating our emotions, communicating your needs, and sometimes, if for some of them, it leads to aggressive behaviors. So I think this one's important because when we encounter people who are aggressive or communicate that way, we want to know why this is happening, and also what can be changed, or how can we improve their situation. So usually, well, not usually, actually, every one of them, it stems from the self-regulation difficulties. And those self-regulation difficulties stem from, many things. It could be their attachment to their primary caregivers. We're thinking of children who have been traumatized or victims of neglect, maltreatment. Sometimes due to those elements or the neurodevelopmental disorders, they might have a younger developmental age. So you can have like the equivalent of a 2-year-old, but in the body of a 10-year-old. Sometimes there's intergenerational trauma that may affect them. We can think also of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or other prenatal exposures to drugs. And the ones that might be less common is perception. So when you have a neurodevelopmental disability, or if you've been traumatized in your life, sometimes the perception of why adults will set boundaries, why there are rules in place in the world, might be different for them. So quite often what we encounter is any sort of boundary setting is experienced by the young person as a threat, or as something that is not in place for their protection, and it's not there out of concern and love. So that's something that as therapists we try to work on. But I think for anyone who encounters an aggressive incident, or a young person who has difficulties communicating without the use of aggression, this is something to keep in mind, that their perception might be different than what's actually happening. Aggressive script, is something that also happens. And just to say that usually it's not like one thing, it's many elements or all of them. So aggressive script is that some of these young people have internalized that we should respond by violence. So they will say things, and they've heard that sometimes through peers, movies, their family of origin, like, okay, he pissed me off, so I'm just gonna, punch him, and that's how we solve our problems. And that's something that they have really internalized, that kind of aggressive script. And then modeling, again, it comes down to the very similarly having peers who do this, watching it in movies, or on social media, having your family dealing with conflicts that way. And priming, the last one, is something that may happen when you use a certain behavior a lot. This is what your brain will be more inclined to do. So just to give you an example, if I'm with Tanya and I step on her foot, I was raised to say, oh, sorry, and I don't even think about it. It's just like it's a reflex almost. And it's almost the same thing for some of these youth. They've been like using aggression so often that they don't even think about it. It just goes boom, right? So that's also something else that we have to keep in mind. And when we're looking at the reasons why some of these children and youth use aggression, we can look at this and go, okay, what can be changed? Like when you're thinking of prenatal exposure, it's something that happened in the past. There's not much we can do, but we can certainly teach them skills. We can provide support. We can support their environment, people who are supporting them as well. And mental health support is certainly quite needed in these cases. You can switch to the next one. Okay, And that's again from the consortium. When we asked families, like, what would you like to see? You know, like, what do you think will be a good outcome? Personally, honestly, I was surprised. A lot of them said, yes, we want to improve our child's, self-regulation, but we want to improve our relationship. We want you to teach us how to walk in the storm. We know it cannot be completely solved. Very likely my child will continue to have self-regulation issues, but we want to be able to communicate better. We want to be able to live as a family under the same roof if possible. So, I guess sometimes we're very focused on changing the young person's behavior, which is not a bad thing, but sometimes we have to focus on how do we best support the family that deals with a very complex child who could likely continue using aggressive behaviors. One thing that was shared as well by the young people who were involved in the consortium and were displaying aggression when they were younger said, we were trying to communicate, but we didn't have the skill to communicate our emotions or thoughts. And that's something they said, we need to focus on that. Like, how can we improve communication for these young people and their caregivers? So certainly we want to improve safety for everyone in the house and their relationship, and that we'll teach you today some ways that we have found helpful and some of the families that we interact with have found helpful. Yes. So I will not talk more today about not AFCCA, but about the consortium on AFCCA. And if you would like to read the full report, we have a website. Most of it has been translated into French. And it's just the first step towards a better understanding of AFCCA, more research. We're quite at the beginning stage of it. And please reach out to the consortium if you want to know more, if you want to get involved. Next. Okay, a tornado in the family. So when we started hearing about AFCCA, one of my concern, it was the concern of many individuals who interact with these families were, we don't want to create more stigma. They often feel blame, the young people, the parents. There's a lot of shame involved in families, who experience AFCCA. So we were trying to find a way to externalize the problem, because often it's not so much of a family issue. It's more of a, okay, there's a complex need person here who needs a lot of support, and that becomes very complex. And sometimes people minimize it, or some people will try to find who's guilty and who's to blame here. So to avoid that, we thought of a metaphor that is called the tornado. And what it means is that in every single family, if there's children, there will be behaviors that are not super appropriate at times, and it's the wind, right? It's in every family. The wind is in every family. Tornadoes are not in all families. So the tornado is like AFCCA. It leaves devastation behind. It leaves a lot of people traumatized. They will need emergency services. They will need support from their communities. They will need understanding, and they will need time to recover. And it's no one's fault. It's just something that happens in life. And we have to understand better what it looks like for families and how we can best support them. Yeah, I think it's your turn, Tanya.
Okay. So we started this program last, I guess, August, really got going in September, and we're starting from the ground up. And the way we began organizing it is by considering families in kind of different levels of need. So our level one, and I'm not going to go through all of the supports we've now put in place, because that's what's under these level two, or the levelings. levels, but I want to describe how we consider the levels and how that interacts specifically with the justice system in various levels. So level 1, those are families that have probably experienced AFCCA in the past, or there's a threat of it. It's coming. You can kind of see things that are increasing, behaviors are changing, possibly with the child who's aging, possibly with a child whose life is getting more complex on a number of levels. So that's what level 1. There's no crisis. We've got some supports that we can put in place and that Adopt for Life. And I think we've come up with some pretty cool and effective supports. Level 2, those are families who started experiencing AFCCA more actively. They don't feel out of control, but they're worried, they're getting scared. Things are starting to become entrenched. They're looking for services, or they're keeping it a secret, which is also very common. They're hiding it because this is not something they expected, and we'll go more into all of that. Level 3 families, those are the families who are in crisis. Those are the families who are calling the police, sometimes quite frequently. They are reaching out desperately to services. Sometimes they don't feel like their children can be in their home. This is where we have a lot more direct interaction with various levels of the justice system. And this is where, in our experience so far, one of the things we really aren't interested in doing in this presentation is complaining about how the justice system is working, because actually I think the justice system is doing its best. But we are seeing, and I know police are seeing, and many systems are seeing, things are weak and flawed and breaking down right now in a way that they probably haven't for a while, I think. And so we're seeing, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of are parents calling police come and help. Police maybe have to take kids to hospitals. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Maybe the child stays for a while, but then, and the police wants the child to get help, and the police get to leave, but then the hospital doesn't have enough services, and they send a child who's had no actual support in the hospital and may actually be getting worse because of isolation and all sorts of things. That child has to be sent home because there's no other option. We're seeing a lot of systems passing these families around because they're out of support or they don't know how to support. So they pass to another system, thinking that system might have support: child protection systems, mental health systems, hospital systems, all of the different systems we have. And what's happening is parents are just being passed and passed and passed, and systems are getting frustrated with each other. And we're not seeing a lot of collaboration and creativity, and we're seeing a lot of overwhelm, and a lot of danger, because these children are then, with no support or no help, they're being forced to go back home where they're quite dangerous. So that's a real issue that we're seeing, and we'll be talking later about what we're hoping for. The other piece that I think is really important, and we wanted people to be more aware of, is the family's experience. As a parent, I think we all, when anyone who's a parent, when we see behaviors in our children, we project those into the future. And our families are terrified of what their children's futures will be. And they anticipate and fear future justice issues. So those are just two things. And I think it's really important to be aware of that, because that fear increases parents' stress levels, and it makes it more difficult sometimes for them to reach out to police. So there's, and that's because of their perceptions too. So there's some interesting things that we're seeing on both of those things. So mode.
I tend to mute myself because my dog snores really loud. So yeah. Yes, thank you, Tanya. And it's true, like what we've been seeing so far is that there's a lot of concern from parents. We're calling the police at times, but most interactions have been very positive, and they do need the police to get involved quite often. And most parents, they said it has been helpful. So that's really good. So family adaptation and resilience. This is something we use to kind of describe what happens in the family. So we do work with adoptive families or families formed through kinship, customary care. So most of the youth that we encounter have been traumatized and have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. Actually, a lot of them are diagnosed or in the process to be diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So even when we have parents who have like lots of resources, even financial, they have people around them, they've been through all sorts of trainings, like they have a very high parental capacity, the scale gets kind of like this, and the family becomes in crisis because the demand of all those appointments, just the daily challenges of having a child who's oppositional, who will use aggression towards them, the school's calling, they fear for their safety, sometimes there's physical injury happening, the scale gets off balance, and that's when families are in crisis. And a lot of families were coming from equity-seeking groups. So for example, indigenous families, Black families, and sometimes the adoptive parents are non-Black, but they do have an indigenous child or a Black child. They are sometimes more concerned about calling first responders because of how systemic racism and how that could impact their child. So this is something that we have to keep in mind when we're interacting with these families, and just having in mind that scale where, you know, when we're interacting with those families, there's a lot of trauma involved. They're quite off balance, but usually that side of like the support and the resources that they have would be really high. They're very competent parents, but the demand is just too great for regular caregivers or anyone most often.
So I'm just going to give you a case study. This is a case study that we created. It's not obviously a real family, but it is based off of the stories that we've been working, or the families we've been working with. And in listening to in doing these presentations, other people are saying, yeah, that's very much what we're seeing. So here's an example of a case, I'm going to be reading it, that we see frequently. So Cindy and John are adoptive parents, and I want you to think about this scale as you listen to this story, right? What is on what side? And yeah, they have two bio children who were in their late teens. Those children have turned out successfully. They've also fostered children for 15 years and have taken many courses in parenting children who experience trauma and attachment issues. So these are parents who know how to parent better than I do. They adopted Charlie and Nevaeh when they were 5 and 2 years old. They are bio siblings who were removed when they were 9 months and 3 years old from a home where they experienced neglect due to their parents' addiction issues. They also witnessed abuse. After removal, they lived in 3 different foster placements. Charlie and Nevaeh are now 12 and 9 years old. They both have ADHD diagnoses and are on medication to help, but Charlie's medication doesn't seem to address the severe impulsivity. Nevaeh does fairly well in school. She struggles with math, but she has good grades overall and doesn't cause many problems in the classroom, although she has few, if any, friends. She attends school regularly. Charlie, however, struggles in all domains. He is extremely aggressive with his mother in particular and has shown serious aggression at school. Currently, he only attends 1 to 2 hours of school a day when they can get him to attend at all. His mother cannot work anymore because she has to be at home with them, and they have no other options for him during the day, which places the family under financial strain and means Cindy spends a great deal of time alone with him. He is now bigger than she is and has seriously injured her more than once. Cindy and John have become quite isolated in the past few years as their extended family and friends have stopped inviting them over, and they've stopped sharing what's really going on in their home because they're embarrassed, ashamed. don't want to hear the judgment. People have called CAS on them, and when they've heard Charlie melting down in public, and they've been investigated more than once, but they've not been offered supports as there was not a child protection concern deemed, or there were no child protection concerns. They have an FASD support worker who tries to help them with school and has connected them to an FASD support group and some trainings. They have not yet been able to get an FASD assessment, and they're on the wait list. Cindy and John have had to call the police more than once during particularly dangerous meltdowns with mixed success. Sometimes Charlie calms down. The policemen have frequently been good with their child and then have proceeded to lecture them about how to manage. Twice when Charlie was not able to calm down, they took him to the hospital where he waited for a very long time, was seen by a psychiatrist who made recommendations, but the recommendations weren't followed through on at the hospital, and they were sent home with a piece of paper making recommendations like try letting him spend time in the shower, as well as a feelings wheel and instructions on how to use empathetic statements like, I can see you're upset. They were also told to attend a parenting class that teaches the circle of security, and were seen as not complying when they didn't go to the class. They've already taken that class. Really, they could teach that class. They've been offered financial help to get respite, but they have no idea where to go for that help. And they don't actually have the emotional time and space to find someone and hire them and do all of the things that entails. Their older children avoid coming home because they find it too stressful there. Their marriage is strained with stress, exhaustion, and conflict of having conflict they have on how to manage Charlie's behavior. Cindy tends to give in to Charlie's demands to avoid explosions and try to keep herself safe. And John is more authoritative and punishes Charlie. So that's a really typical style of family that we see. And you can see on this screen, well, these parents are highly experienced and highly intelligent and well-trained. They have some useful support systems like the FASD worker, and they have some understanding allies. But unfortunately, a lot of the systems that they've been interacting with end up becoming more on the demand side than on the capacity side. And that's really, I think, in some ways what we hope to, one of the big things we would like to help change is we need the systems to understand how they can be more helpful than harmful. I mean, they have to deal with trauma, health problems, social isolation. Having AFCCA in your home for most people has become very isolating. They're exhausted. There is now financial strain because mom can't work anymore. School difficulties are very common with our families because we're working with children with neurodiversities, and we also know the schools have been under a lot of strain. The neurodivergence, poor fitting services, the complexity of trying to navigate the systems in Ontario is profound. The aggression is one of those things, and then having judgmental friends and family is also incredibly painful for these folks. And these are just some of the demands, as you can imagine. So we're trying to help balance those scales more and help people be more aware of what they're seeing isn't about parents not being capable, but the level of demand that they're experiencing in their home. So, sorry. One of the other pieces, and this is tied to that isolation, is that AFCCA is all about, there's so much shame around AFCCA. And just simply shame being that emotion that is, when you feel it, it's I'm no good. It's not I've done something wrong, what can I do to fix it? Shame shuts us down. And so we're trying really hard, and we want to help people also try really hard to help reduce shame in parents. Creating more social supports, validating parents and how difficult this is, and how strong they are. So many of these parents have had, I hear them talk about how they're just always feeling like they're fighting. They're fighting for their kids, they're fighting and fighting and fighting, and they're exhausted from the fight. And being understood and validated is so empowering for them. We're doing things, and we'll discuss that, helping parents have a little more self-control in those moments, because it is very difficult it's so complicated when your child is being aggressive to you, because our nature as parents is to protect our child and protect ourselves. And that, as you can imagine, it's a completely different kind of experience to have to navigate as a human being, as a mom or a dad. And moms are most often more vulnerable, not always, but most often. Or the primary caregiver is actually most often more vulnerable, but it depends on what the child's experience was too. So helping parents have a little more empowerment and self-control in the situations is really important, and that's some of the things we're working on. And we're helping parents learn, again, how to live according to their values, because as you can imagine, when you adopt a child, you have a dream of what you hope your family is going to look like. And when your family ends up living with AFCCA, that's a nightmare. That is not the dream you expected. And so you end up shifting who you are as a parent and how you move in your family and through life. And so we're helping people regain their value system, regain their ability to parent, because it's very easy to lose that. So what you see, shame is felt when you feel inadequate, but what we see, shame looks like not asking for help because I'm too embarrassed. It's social isolation. And then it also is withdrawing from the child's presence. Parents end up shrinking, and the child ends up feeling more powerful, but also more scared, because children will fight for, anyone who's anxious will fight for control, but children don't actually want to be in charge. They want people looking after them. And yet when they've never experienced adults who are trustworthy, they really struggle with letting people look after them. We also work on some of the strategies for reducing shame in the child. And this is important if you're interacting with a child. So helping them have information about what your intention is in your behavior towards them. You know, I'm doing this because is really important. Relationship gestures and rainbow baskets is a little more for parents, but that's other strategies around kind of more strength-based. And relationship gestures are doing little things that are kind and loving, even when a child isn't behaving well, because it's just really important as a parent to be able to be that person you wanted to be as a parent. We're such a behavioral minded, punish and reward system society, and that system does not work in these cases. So we need to get away from the idea of you reward good behavior and you punish bad behavior, because as we can see, this behavior is not about being bad. It's about survival and trauma and neurodiversity and all of those things. So we just want you to understand that violence thrives in secrecy, and that's true across the board in all sorts of different situations. And children need to experience adults being supportive, open, and transparent. That really helps counteract some of the aggression. So here's some of the strategies that we're working with. We have these are the three main therapeutic strategies that we're using in working with the families. And we're going to explain them all a little more. Polyvagal theory is about our nervous systems and that fight, flight, that reaction to danger, the protective things that we do. Neuro de-escalation is a form of helping de-escalate situations quickly near the beginning. Yeah, and I'll give a little more. We're still learning more about how to use neuro de-escalation. And nonviolent resistance, which is Mode's specialty. Other things we're using in Adopt for Life are things like peer support. We're trying to advocate for funding for respite, because these kids need a break from their families, and families need a break from their kids. Both are very important. And those were things that were very badly damaged, systems that were very badly damaged during COVID. And we also really want to help work on using safer language when we work with these families, and we'll talk a little more about that. So polyvagal theory is kind of one of my passions, and I wish everyone could learn about it. And it's really just looking at our actual nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and how it's trying to protect us and how it feels in safety. So I'm working with parents in support groups teaching this. But it's really, really good to be aware when you're working with parents or kids with AFCCA about the fact that often they don't feel safe ever. It's very, and when we're not feeling safe, we have a much more difficult time. Our processing speed slows down. We have a more difficult time thinking things through. We become more rigid, more survivalist, or we shut down, which is dorsal, right? We might be dissociating or just spacing out, zoning out. That's very common, and having a really hard time navigating. You see this with people going into shock, just not being able to think. So it's not dissimilar to that. So this is what we're teaching. These kind of, it's polyvagal theory is based off of Stephen Porges, is the guy who started this. It's becoming really popular and well known. Deb Dana taught me from this perspective of having a nervous system as a ladder and 3 levels, the dorsal being the collapse, sympathetic being what we see as classic anxiety, stress, fight, flight, and freeze as a deer in the headlights. And then ventral vagal is that place of safely feeling safe, embodying safety, and being able to connect with other people. And as you can imagine, our parents rarely feel safe with their child. They also don't feel safe in systems. And so we need to help increase parental safety when we're working with them in our systems. And then we'll all be able to work together better. And I'm just going to do a little bit about neuro de-escalation, which is, I think, a really promising thing. So Christian Gottel is a child and youth psychiatrist from Austria. And this principle it's kind of a bottom of the brain up idea of trying to reach the response, the stress response from like the brainstem, lower limbic system, lower part of our brain, and with messages of connection and safety. So that's why we're working with parents to be able to reach safety faster, because if they can't be safe, they can't help co-regulate or create safety for their children. And our children look to us. The newest person in the room is who we orient to. And so if a parent can't be safe, then a child is going to read that, their nervous system's going to read that, and they're going to react to that, and things will escalate. So we need the parent or caregiver and any professionals, for example, police, coming into the room to be regulated, so that a child can regulate to orient to that safety. Using fear to correct escalation. And I know most people who've done any kind of de-escalation know fear does not de-escalate. Safety de-escalates. But the other piece is actually attuned energy, which means, and I'm going to talk a little more about this a little later, I think, it means actually meeting someone at their energy level, but not matching their emotions. So if someone's really angry and escalating, we don't match them with anger, but we match them with intensity. And if we can match with intensity and bring ourselves down, that person's more likely to follow us down to safety. We also use distraction. Distraction is incredibly valuable, and emotional and physical nourishment, which is really interesting, but really distracting things like, hey, let's get Tim's, or do you want me to just go grab you a sandwich, or something that's literally physically nourishing, but also emotional connection nourishment can distract the brain from their hyper focus on whatever is causing the aggression. And you can then again lead towards emotional regulation. So this training, we've had the first level. Christian Gottel is still developing it and translating it to English. So we were the first people that I think learned it in English, and we're going to keep working on this and hopefully providing it for more families and maybe more professionals in the future. We're very excited about it. Road.
Yeah, nonviolent resistance. I'm quite passionate about this. When we started hearing about AFCCA and trying to find some solutions, we looked abroad, like what other countries do. And MVR is something that is very popular in the UK, in Israel, and many other countries in Europe. And it was created as a family therapy in Israel. So someone at Tel Aviv University, his name is Chaim Homer. You have the, when you receive the PowerPoint, you have the reference here. And if you click on the link, Chaim Homer NVR, you'll see all the evidence-based of this, this systemic therapy. So NVR was, prior to being a family therapy, an ideology or an approach to oppression. So you have here Gandhi, who is someone who was teaching about nonviolent resistance. And you also have a picture of Rosa Parks here. She's the woman in United States who, as a Black woman, was asked by a white person to give up her seat because that was the law or the rule at the time, and she refused. So in NVR, this is something that we call active resistance. So basically, the idea behind NVR is to respond to aggression, oppression, control, and violence in a non-violent way. And it's a call to resist that violence. So maybe that's unclear how it's done in a family context, but I'll explain more. So for example, Rosa Parks, she refused, but she didn't stay alone with her issue. She had a whole community behind her to help her resist the oppression. You can switch. I'll just keep going, and sometimes it doesn't respond the way we want, right?
Oh,
well, that's not what I wanted,
no.
but it's okay.
I don't think you've got. Do you want to talk more about the NVR? Well, we have it.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yes. So, okay, and then you'll see more of the NVR component later because we reorganized things last minute. So what does it mean in the family context is that some of the family that we interact with, the child becomes extremely controlling. And I'm not saying that in a blaming way, but just out of their anxiety, they will start controlling, okay, you're not allowed to come to my room. I don't eat with you. They decide exactly what they're going to eat. They don't shower. There's a lot of things happening in the home that don't fit the family values at all at this point, but the family is concerned about the anxiety and is very much concerned about the aggression that may happen towards the siblings or towards themselves. So sometimes some of them, they will have a pattern of joining in de-escalation, trying to manage that by, they lose it, they start screaming as well. They try all sorts of things, but it makes things escalate, or they give in they do a pattern of giving in escalation. So they will say, okay, I will give you what you want out of, avoiding a tantrum or something that could be very dangerous. So what NVR does is we're trying to look at it differently. We teach parents how to de-escalate. They are called to recognize some of their patterns that may happen in their home, like either giving in or joining de-escalation. Usually it's not one. It's like sometimes we give in, sometimes we join in de-escalation, and have more of a planned action. What is okay for us to let go at this point, and what is like, no, we're going to address this, but they will not be doing it alone. In NVR, we need a community response, and sometimes that includes people in the justice system. And so,
should I take over because it's supporter stuff next?
Yes.
Okay, let's go and we'll talk a little bit about that community and supporters, and this all kind of comes to a completion, I promise. So we know this isolation grows aggression and shame and exhaustion and powerlessness. We saw that very much in COVID. We absolutely are seeing how all of us, everyone, is still recovering from those years of COVID. Our systems are recovering, and hopefully we can rebuild better. But we've learned that community supports, we can use community supports for respite and relationship de-escalation help. So we'll explain that a little bit. understanding, connection, problem solving, and ideas. Many people, we in Adopt for Life have a lot of peer support networks because peers can help each other so much with ideas about how to do things that when we're under stress, we don't have that creative brain power that we would normally have. Also, having someone there can help you help create a buffer, create resilience for you, and help people feel supported and connected. In NVR, probably the biggest focus is on creating supporters. And it's really important to recognize in our society in Canada, we are not good at this. This is actually very countercultural for overall Canadian society. We worship the concept of independence, being a strong, independent person. We want our kids to grow up to be independent, which I have very deep feelings about because it's a lie. None of us are actually independent, and none of us should be or work well independently. We all need other people. But we're not good at this kind of support. And of course, COVID isolated us so much from family members. COVID actually taught us to be a little bit afraid of relationship and afraid of being with people. And so we're really having to push against that actively as we teach people NVR and help teach people how to reach out and create a community of supporters. So this is what supporters can do. We need supporters for our children. So people like friends, extended family members can be excellent support for children. Teachers hopefully can be as well, social workers. There are different programs. And again, we need to grow those programs because these kids, I was working with someone yesterday thinking, what can we do with this kid for the summer? And because of their age and their neurodiversity, there are very few places for this child to be successful in the summer. But staying at home with nothing to do is incredibly dangerous for him and his family. Parents and caregivers also desperately need support. So they need professional supports. They need those systemic supports, but also family members, maybe your faith community, siblings, all of those sorts of things, family, friends can be supporters. So that's where we're trying really hard to be creative and pull in and help people understand how to use supporters, how to be really concrete and specific when asking for help. Because often what we've seen is people might be aware something's going on. And as the families become more and more isolated, people might wonder what's happening and not know what to do. So if we can be specific when we're asking for help, that's really helpful. So we've created a series of different videos in our program, and we're going to show one next for families and for professionals to send to families about how to do this. So here's our wonderful Jen that we work with talking about supporters.
Hi there, my name is Jen and I am an Ontario mother of 6. 4 of my children are adopted and I have several children who are neurodivergent and have significant needs. I know that if you're watching this video, you likely have experienced many of the same things I've experienced as a parent, and I wanted to chat a little bit today about the importance of building a network of supporters for yourself as a caregiver. So from one caregiver to another, I wanted to share a few things in building this network for me that have worked and some things that have not. Okay, I had to switch to my comfy chair for this next part because I just wanted to get real with you all, and I wanted to talk about the issue of asking for help. If you're like me, I know many of us as adoptive kin or customary care parents are the same in that we are afraid to ask for help. We don't want to inconvenience others. And a lot of times when we have reached out to ask for help, we've been denied the help we need. And it's a very isolating experience to be in that boat, and it makes you want to give up. So you might be watching this thinking, I've tried all this, I've tried to get the support I need, and I haven't been able to get it. Please hang in there and keep watching, because I hope there's some tips here that can help you. So what I would love for you to do is maybe even right now while you're watching this video, or later, it doesn't matter, to get out a piece of paper and physically draw on it who you would like to invite into your circle of support. So for me, this might look different for lots of people. Some people like to draw bubbles or one big circle. For me, it meant drawing a circle and really thinking and getting creative on there, what I needed help with and who I was going to turn to for that help. You might get stuck. I got stuck at first and couldn't even think of a single person outside of my immediate family. So don't be worried if you get stuck. It may take you some time. You might have to ask somebody else to help you think of supporters. First, you're going to list people on there that would be available at the snap of a finger by phone or text. So this doesn't have to be somebody who lives close by. This could be somebody who lives hours away, but it's literally somebody you can call when you're in a crisis to help either talk you through it, or just from a practical side. Say grandma lives a province away from you, but you know that if you call grandma and put her on speakerphone, somehow that automatically de-escalates your child. Sometimes your child doesn't want anybody else hearing them being aggressive. So if they know speakerphone is on, the aggression comes down. The next thing I did was list a couple people that would be available to me physically. Is there a neighbor who would be understanding if you explained your situation that, hey, if I text you, I need help now, could you just come over and just walk right in the door? So they might just come over, walk in the door with an excuse. Maybe they'd say, hey, I need to borrow a gallon of milk. And sometimes that's just enough to get somebody else in the room, and it surprises your child and it gets them to stop, or it helps to get you into a safe place, because adding another adult into the room who's going to support you as a caregiver is incredibly important. If you don't have a neighbor, this might be a family member that lives close by. It could even be something as simple as a school teacher or an EA in the community that your child is kind of jived with and your family respects. So those are kind of your emergency supports. And then you want to broaden from there. You as a caregiver, you're not going to be able to really thrive or survive unless you have time really to have a break from your child and your family. So you're going to need to have supporters in your circle who are going to be available for you to take over so that you can get away and restore yourself. This could be a really trusted babysitter, or perhaps a child and youth worker who can come in and offer you some respite. Maybe it's a camp in your community, a church organization, a before and after school program, just as many outside village supports as you can get to schedule into your calendar regularly, daily, weekly, monthly, that you can get away and restore, so that you are able to come back and return to your child rested and just feeling internally strong. I want to put a little caveat in here, and that is to be selective and careful. You want people on there that support both your child and you as the caregiver. It's surprising how many people you will ask for help will come in and be very supportive for your child. They'll try to be your child's BFF, and they won't support you as much as the parent. And then what ends up happening is they drive a wedge between you and your child and the attachment you are trying to build together. And this isn't just family and friends who can do this. There are professionals, there are therapists who do this as well. So be really careful and selective, and make sure you are choosing people in your village that are going to, yes, connect with your child and be there for your child, but that are always going to keep directing your child back to you as the caregiver, reinforcing the bond. Once I figured out that my circle needed to be full of those types of people who also valued me as a person, that made me feel like I didn't need to be a doormat, all of a sudden things got a lot better in my ability to parent my children, in my ability to have healthy boundaries for myself, to take care of myself. And please know that even if you're in a really desperate situation right now and you don't feel like you have help, you don't feel like you have anybody you can turn to for support, there are people out there that want to help. It could just be too, you've maybe asked them for help, but they didn't know how. So be specific. Tell them exactly what you need them to say in scenario A, B, and C. And you'll be surprised at how many people actually do really want to be there for you. So I hope there was something here in this video that's helpful to you. I wish you well, and I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Thanks, guys. Bye.
So as you can see, Jen is an incredibly valuable person on our team. And we're creating a number of videos and tip sheets like this that could be available to professionals to hand out, I think, and also can be what we're giving to parents so that they're hearing someone else who's in the same boat talking about how to do this. It really takes a village to raise these kids, and I'm going to talk a little more about that later. But I think anyone coming in contact with family can be helping, can be a supporter, even if you're a supporter in a small way. Anytime you're a supporter, you're on the right side of balancing that scale. And if you can be a supporter over time and can help balance that out over time, even better. So, mode, and this is the one you were looking for earlier.
Yes. So, and I explained that a bit earlier, giving in escalation and joint escalation. So just to re-explain what it looks like, when you have a child who starts escalating and the parents will be concerned that things are going to get worse, either they start shouting as well and becomes a shouting match. And I think a lot of parents sometimes we feel like they have to win the argument. So that leads to just an increase in escalation. And sometimes what we're seeing is the giving in is at some point they're like, okay, fine, I'll give you what you want. And then that reinforces that pattern of like the child knows that if they escalate, it could lead to giving in. And sometimes it's not necessarily a joint escalation or giving in escalation. The child becomes dysregulated for whatever reasons quite often. So for example, with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and that's something like that's the issue we see commonly. They have an anxiety and stress baseline that is really, really high. So people are going to be like, okay, what was the trigger? But the trigger is not necessarily the issue. You know, you can just step on their foot, or, you know, it could be quite innocuous, but that's going to set them off because they were really up there already. So even with the best intervention, it's possible that the person will stay escalated. So we're learning as well about neural de-escalation, and I think Tanya is going to talk about it more later. But the main idea is for the parents to be able to recognize how they might in certain times join in or giving de-escalation. So we help them in recognizing some of those patterns to change them. And sometimes what happens is like it's an interaction between the siblings or the partner. So for example, one partner might hear the shouting match, so they come in, they want to de-escalate, so they give in, or things are starting to de-escalate, but then the sibling comes in and then starts, you know, joining de-escalation, and that's not helpful. You can switch to the next one.
So
I feel like you have more to do.
I know. This is that piece that Maud was saying about the de-escalation. So we wanted to share some of our more specific de-escalation strategies. So one is when things are calm, creating a safety plan. And what we've learned is it's sometimes just really important to have someone with you as you're creating the safety plan, because as a grown-up, just trying to think through a safety plan is dysregulating. It's difficult. So having someone who can help you be calm can help you think. And I've done this with parents, and they're shocked at how many ideas they can come up with when they're actually doing that. So we're creating tip sheets, and we're probably going to be doing more about helping people with safety plans. But that's a really valuable thing. So people don't feel as afraid. They feel like they know what to do when things start to escalate. The most important one that I have learned over the years is to slow down. And I'm going to say this on two different levels. One is I learned a long time ago, so many of the kids we work with have processing speed issues. But even in processing speed just means their brains take longer to think things through. But even if someone doesn't have a processing speed issue, when we're stressed, our ability to think well slows down. Everyone. And when I'm in my private practice, I frequently ask children, do people talk too fast? And most of the time they say yes. So as a professional, always remember when you're in one of these situations, if you can slow your language down, first of all, talking more slowly regulates yourself. It also means the person listening will probably be more likely able to follow what you're saying and get the message that you're trying to portray. So many of our kids cover up the fact that they're not understanding us, and they cover it up with a yes, a no, or I don't know, because we feel stupid if we can't follow along. And stupid is shameful. And we think back to that shame shuts us down. So if we can slow down our language, slow down and simplify our talking, we will be more successful in helping the other person co-regulate and hear us. Also, we need to ground ourselves. The other thing I wanted to say about slowing down is any kind of thing that sets off our alarms, if we get a stressor, it comes with a sense of urgency. That's part of how our nervous system works. And if we can take a moment, very rarely do we not have a moment to ground ourselves, to take a breath, to try to connect our brain again and not just go off of our stress, fight, flight, nervous system response. I was talking to a parent yesterday, and she was saying this, if I feel calm, but then something happens that it's so jarring. And when we dug a little deeper, it was because she feels like she has to leap up and save the day. And otherwise, like it feels like life or death. And it rarely is life or death. Actually, when we were learning from Christian Gödel, the man who was teaching us about neuro de-escalation, he did a really good example of in a hospital, a mental support institution. There was a patient who was suicidal and a cutter, and their one-to-one worker went into the room, and that person had gotten a piece of glass and was saying, I have this glass, and was escalating. And the worker immediately thought, oh no, but went and called their supporter. And their supporter said, how long does it take to bleed out? Which sounds shocking, but actually helped her remember, have time here, and helped her take the time to address this without panicking. So I talked before about the idea of matching intensity and not emotion. That's so important. If someone, I often tell this story, so anyone who's heard it, I'm sorry, but I had something called Graves' disease about 12 years ago, and I was hyperthyroid, which my resting heart rate was 140, and it just went up anytime I moved, stood up, anything. So I was a walking panic attack until I was treated. And I was doing my master's practicum at the time, and one of my colleagues was a yogi. She was very calm, and I couldn't stand being around her. We often teach people, or have historically taught people, to be calm when someone is losing it. The problem is that's a mismatch. And when you're escalating and someone is calm, you feel like you don't get it. You don't see what the problem is. I don't feel safe with you. And it actually increases the escalation. So what we have to do is match the intensity, and we can do that just with our energy, with our face, with our voice, with the way we're holding our body. We can practice matching intensity and then bring ourselves down with our voice again, with our body, and probably that person will follow us, because there's a whole lot of biology and neurology happening with that. They'll follow us into a calmer place. They might not calm down completely. They might pop up and escalate again where we have to match their intensity again, but it's a very effective tool for co-regulating and de-escalating. Calling on supporters, of course, what Jen was just talking about. And that other piece of distracting and nourishing that I talked about, distraction. Oh my gosh, what's going on out there? Oh, do you see what's going, distraction can really, sometimes what's happening when escalation is happening is something we call perseverating, which is someone is hyper-focused on something. The something they're hyper-focused on isn't actually ever the problem. I don't think ever, but it's not the problem. The stress, probably 18 things that happened before are the problem. The thing they're hyper-focused on was the last thing that went wrong. So distraction is a little bit like, I think of perseverating like a record that's skipping, and people remember what records are. I think I dated myself there. And distraction is like bumping that record and getting the needle to skip into a new groove and start moving again properly. So it's quite an effective tool frequently. The other piece that's really important, and it's on the right-hand side of this slide, is strike when the iron is cold. When people are escalating is never a time to teach a lesson. It's never a time to, it's a time to use as few words as possible. When things calm down, when there is safety again in the circumstances, that's when we can actually do some teaching, some learning, and some observing, and all of those things, some connecting, but never when escalation is happening. So what this looks like for us, we wanted to describe this, what we deal with in our Adopt for Life program in practice, sorry, slow myself down. If you think about the case study that I had up earlier, what we would see is a family, first of all, they would have to talk about the fact that they're experiencing AFCCA, right? So sometimes it takes a while for people to admit that's happening. Although now that we're starting to talk about it, we're seeing more and more people feeling safe talking about it, which is good, although it means that we have pretty huge numbers. And just to be really open with you, we are 1.5 FTEs in our program as clinical leads, and we're serving all of Ontario, and we have well over 400 identified cases in just the 6 months we've been working. So we're doing our best, again, with limited resources, but we try to get people practical support. So we try to get people connected with things like respite, financial supports, things like that. And Maud, if you want to step in with any of this stuff, we've created support groups, partly because then you have peer-to-peer support, but also partly because then we can help more people at a time. So we have peer-led support groups that we're not actually involved in, but what we call regional parent liaisons, the peer-to-peer support people are leading. We might help people create a safety plan. We might give them the information so they can create their own safety plan, because we obviously can't do that for 400 people at a time. We now have clinician-led, so I lead polyvagal groups specifically, and we add some de-escalation components to those groups. So that's the first thing, is we're trying to help these parents who are experiencing higher levels, level 2 and 3 of AFCCA, just help regulate themselves, remember what it feels like to be safe, because often they haven't felt safe again for years. So helping their nervous system remember what safety is like and learn to recover faster from danger, and then building in some resilience to their nervous systems. For the number of people that we are now introducing NVR groups. So polyvagal groups, we do about 6 sessions, usually bi-weekly. NVR interventions are much more intense intervention. And so Maud and I lead those together. Maud spearheads those, and I help. And in those groups, we work with 6 families at a time. We have the families kind of matched as far as what their their children are like, what the children's age group, so that again, it helps them support each other. And we do it so we have one-to-one and then a group and one-to-one, and we have 6 group sessions and 7 one-to-one sessions. And then we're learning and developing how to keep following up, because it takes 13 sessions to really start making that shift into NVR and how to parent from in an NVR nonviolent resistant way. And then we're working on, because we've just finished our first 13 session group. And we're working on how we're going to follow up and continue to support families and then keep growing that. So that's what it looks like right now. I just want to add in this spot, one of the things that, another thing we want people and our systems to be aware of is, for many of our families, especially our families experiencing that level 3 crisis intensity, families may need a break. Often our children may need to go into care. Sometimes they're in hospitals for extended periods of time because there are. So another thing we are seeing, and we really feel is quite urgent, is a profound lack of placement for these highly complex children. And so parents are being forced or pressured to take these kids back into their home when they're beaten up, literally beaten up. They're being told to take their kids back home. And that's obviously very dangerous. And it's just, we understand there's many, many factors. So there's a few things we are hoping for. We need to work together to try to create more supports. We need to, the siloing of all of our systems, we kind of need to work together. We're going to talk more about that. There is something that is also happening that we're seeing. And so when a child finds a placement, they go in something called the temporary care agreement with CAS. Actually, I want to back up. What we really want to see is what we call co-parenting, a co-parenting paradigm, because these children need a village. A nuclear family is actually not enough for some of our most complex children. But removing the children from their parents' care is also destructive for everyone involved. So we've tried this. We're seeing some success in a highly supported co-parenting kind of model. And so that's going to need some help with finding placements, finding the supporters for the placements, and also expanding the TCA component, because there's a legal component to that. At this point, our legal system says that a temporary care agreement can be for 12 months only. And we know that sometimes in 12 months, not a lot gets done, because it takes a while to get everyone on board and everyone understanding, and there's a lot of complexity to this. So we need some legal support in increasing the 12 months. And that's something that we've been advocating, and just need people to be aware of in the legal system, that sometimes those TCAs, for very good reasons, need to be extended past 12 months. Because otherwise what's happening is the children are being legally removed from their parents. And again, that doesn't help anyone. Okay, just wanted to put that little bit in. So here we go. Here are some possible outcomes from our program. We're seeing that families are feeling more competent. The families are feeling more connected, and they're having a real change in perspective and self-narrative about their capacity, their capability. They're learning, for example, we just heard at the end of our NVR group, I know how to say no to things now. I'm not giving in. I know I can say no, and I know I have supporters. I'm not as isolated. And so that is improving child and parent relationship and helping the parent be more self-regulated. I can't see the one behind here. And parents are having better boundaries. Yeah, and children are learning how to live within better boundaries, which is incredibly important for their future success. So, mode.
So safety plans. Like Tanya said, we're creating currently resources to help families make their own safety plans For the families that are level 3 that we're able to see, we create the safety plans with them if that's needed. Otherwise, we don't have that on our platform at Adopt for Life now, but we will have it soon. We will have a video that explains what safety plans could look like, how to create their own safety plan. We have a tip sheet as well as a template that they can fill out. The main goal of a safety plan is to increase the overall safety of the family. And like Tanya mentioned before, if there's no plan in place and then a situation happens, the family is more disorganized and they don't know what to do. So we want them to have a plan and think of several possible scenarios that may happen and what can be done to prevent it. And if those scenario happens, what do you do? And we often want to have in the plan a plan for recovery, because beyond prevention or knowing what to do in the moment, we think it's important for parents to, after an incident, be able to go back to a place of safety, to recover, and be able to feel safe enough to re-engage with the young person. Again, a safety plan is not going to remove all the risk, but we do think it's best to be prepared. You can go to the next slide.
I just wanted to add in this, just sometimes we might need multiple safety plans as well for different scenarios. So for example, a safety plan when one of the partners has to go away, a safety plan when both partners are there. You know, there's can be different safety plans for different scenarios, and that can be really important.
Okay, so that's an example of a safety plan that we have done. And to build on what Tanya just said, sometimes if the young person has a good understanding of what's happening and has enough cooperation, we can build a safety plan for them as well, for them to be able to recognize their own trigger, you know, use some calming strategies. And there's a really good resource for people with FASD called FASD and Me. And it's a great tool for the children and young people to understand themselves better and learn to advocate for themselves and their needs. So if you think of what we thought in this webinar at the beginning, we talked about increasing their ability to communicate, and that's one of the ways we can do that. So here we have a safety plan. What are the behaviors that we will address with the safety plan? So here it's no screaming, hitting, shoving, punching, throwing objects, breaking things. And in NVR, we do something called the basket exercise, whereas we prioritize the behaviors that we will address and the ones that we might let go for a while. So here, one of the tools that is used is take space. When you start feeling angry, you start name calling people, then you have to either go to your room or go to the basement. So with the young person, we will decide where they're going. And taking space, you know, when we work with kids like FASD, they may not understand what taking space means. So you have to be very straightforward and like, this is where you would go. If the young person doesn't go, which really could happen, then we will ask them to stop and maybe direct them there, go with them, remind the child of the behavior that is unacceptable, use the neuro de-escalation tool. And we want to have a plan for the children that are in the home as well, like either taking the pet with them to their room. So they need a safe place to go. And quite often we want them to be able to call for help, text someone, depending on the situation. A lot of the families we work with also have cameras and alarms in their home. Cameras are a great tool to supervise children from a distance. A lot of kids with FASD, they get into the cupboards when they shouldn't. they escaped the house. So you might have an alarm on your door to know, okay, someone just left the house. So it can be a great tool for supervision and also for siblings. And also to look at what really happened during an incident. And again, we want to have all those numbers on hand, either mental health support, the police. What we also tell family is to mention to the police that either the child's on the vulnerable persons list and how to interact with the child. So for example, we tell them to call and say, is it possible to come with a mental health support person? Is it possible to come with a nurse? Here's what's happening. Those are my children's diagnosis. And he often responds to this or that. So we found, like, we were giving trainings before in FASD to the police officers, and we have found that very helpful, but we think sometimes it's also very helpful for the parent to make the call and explain exactly what that specific child needs and what they need. It does happen sometimes that the parents feel like maybe the interaction is too harsh, because the child has a lot of anxiety, and the parents may have a lot of anxiety in calling the police. So we think it's important to just be clear about those expectations. And how to help, when Tanya was saying, when you're thinking of your supporters, sometimes the supporters are not sure what to do. But as a parent, it's good for them to be able to share, okay, here's what you can do to help in this situation. Next, Tanya.
I just wanted to add the piece about one of the things that can really be helpful for our parents is to be able to have a conversation with the police in a calmer time about, because they need to, a lot of parents are afraid of bothering the police. They don't know what it's going to look like when the police show up. So if they can have a meeting with the police when things are calm and talk about what do they need to do, when should they call, and kind of get that permission from the police, that can really help parents keep themselves and their children safer, because we tend to fill unknowns with fear, and our parents have a lot of fear about a lot of the systems. So that's if the police system can help with that, that's really, really beneficial for some of our families. Oops, got my thing on the wrong. There we go.
Something else that we want to add in the safety plan when we work with them in NVR, we want them to be able to call before calling the police. If things are just starting to escalate, we want them to be able to call a neighbor, for example, or a friend. So we have several ways that we teach parents to de-escalate and just have, not call the police right away, but have different ways of de-escalation. There's something else that we wanted to cover that we feel is important. So I'm not sure how much in your role you're interacting with parents, but what we've been hearing from parents who experience AFCCA, a lot of them are actually quite concerned about calling first responders for several reasons. One of them being reported to CAS. They feel like some of them are already involved with CAS because they needed that support, but for some, they've been investigated by CAS and then they were not provided any support. And then it was just such a bad experience that they're like, okay, I don't really want to call the police again. Other parents are very concerned that the police is going to come and the young person is going to be charged and they will be criminalized. And in our experience, what usually happens is then the young person is redirected towards mental health support. But many parents don't know this, so that's very concerning. They're like, my child has mental health needs, neurodevelopmental disability. That's not what my child needs, and that's a really big concern. Also, often a scenario that we've been seeing, I'm sure all of you are seeing it as well, is that the police comes, the child's very much escalated, they bring the young person to the hospital, to the emergency services, and the child is being sent back home. And so the parents are like, well, at this point, what's the point of calling emergency services, going to the hospital again, if nothing's going to change? So that's a big issue and concern for a lot of parents. Like I mentioned before as well, a lot of parents who identified as BIPOC could feel like there could be systemic racism at play, a lack of understanding in their parenting, assumptions made about their family. So that's a concern for many parents. Another one that we've been hearing is that when first responder comes, they assume it's a parenting issue. They don't know, and to their defense, they don't know the family. They don't know all the parenting classes that they've been doing, all the intervention that have been placed, to support the family. But that's certainly something that happens quite frequently, and that increases the shame. So I think there's a way for first responders to validate the parents' experience. And I think in an ideal world, they would say, I know about AFCCA, I know about what families experience, and just, to bring that awareness to reduce the shame. And I think in FASD and even autism, we've seen that switch of people like having a better awareness and understanding, and usually the police come as a support. Something else I will mention is that in VR, we want families to have kind of a blurb of what the family is experiencing, what the children's needs are, and we want to send a message of concern to the child. So sometimes we do something called a campaign of concern. And if you go back to that perspective that the child has, if he has trauma, that parents and adults don't mean well, we want them to know that the police is actually there for protection of society, for protection of them. We want them to see the police as a support and not as a threat. So sharing that message with first responders, we think is incredibly important. There's a role to play by the police and first responders in supporting the message that the parents are trying to send. And also, I think they also have a role to play in sharing some of the rules around consent, around what can be done to protect vulnerable people. Like, I'll give you an example. We've had a lot of calls for young women. Let's say they're turning 18, they're 17, 18, 19, around that age. Developmentally, they're much younger. And then sometimes they get into sexual relationship or emotional relationship with much older men. And parents need advice in what is the age of consent, what's acceptable, what's not, and maybe sharing that message with the older man, or sharing a message that you're being supervised here for obvious reasons, and just supporting the parents and wanting them to protect their vulnerable children. One of the issue as well is, like, with FASD, they don't necessarily have an IQ under 70, which means they don't have access to developmental services. And what that means is, like, oftentimes parents don't necessarily have the legal rights to access information, and they don't have access to all the services they would have if they qualified for developmental services. So that's something else to keep in mind. I think we can go to the next one, Tanya.
Okay, I wanted to bring this up briefly, and it ties into what Mo just experienced or was explaining. In our services, we've really moved a lot to what we call a strength-based approach. And there's definitely value to a strength-based approach, which is looking at the strengths of the child. We also need to use a strength-based approach when looking at the strength of a family. But here's one of the problems that happens when you're raising a child with an invisible disability or with AFCCA, that expresses AFCCA, is that these parents have spent years trying to teach people that their child has challenges. They've had to advocate and fight with the school, with family, with so many different friends, all sorts of different situations to say, no, I have these rules in place because my child needs them. This is what my child needs, trying to advocate for support. And they're constantly needing to help actually point out the disability because it's invisible. And so they develop a deep fear of people overestimating their child, and a lack of recognition of what the problem really is. And lots of very well-intentioned people. So what often happens, and so the other way that comes across in aggression is lots of people saying, oh, that's just how boys are, or yeah, children do that, and really minimizing and not understanding the depth of the problem and the struggle that a parent's having. So what happens for parents is they'll go work with a system, and a system will say, oh, your child, and I'm going to tell you, these are kids who can usually at first glance portray strength, because that's a survival strategy, right? Looking good, we all do that. We all look our shiny best when we're first meeting someone. So that's what these kids are really good at. And so then what often happens is a professional will say, oh, they're such a great kid, I really like this about them, or something, trying to do a strength-based approach. What a parent hears is, oh no, you don't see it. You think I'm the problem. You think I'm a bad parent. I have to do the fight again. I have to advocate again. I can't trust you. And I think you can see how that could be. And so I just really want to help teach you this simple thing of definitely see the child's strengths. It's really important. These kids need to be seen. They need their strengths to be seen, because we do over time see their challenges, and they hear about them lots. But parents need to hear, I see your child's strengths, and we need to validate, I see how difficult your struggle is. We really need to validate that, and we need to look for the struggle and how we can help with the struggle, because it is deep and profound, for these families. This one's your mode.
Mm-hmm. Something else is that the use of language. I talked about it at the beginning, how important language was. So we encourage everyone who interact with families who experience AFCCA to use, to not say delinquent, violent child, aggressive child, but to use words like persons first. So the young person who displays aggression, who displays AFCCA, the family who is experiencing AFCCA. Maybe that doesn't apply to you as much, but oftentimes Children's Aid would say when there's a risk of separation, because the behaviors are so dangerous, they would call this abandonment. But actually the parents are not abandoning the child. They are trying to get the best treatment and the best environment for their child, but they also want to survive, the children to survive. And sometimes it's also protecting siblings. It's far from being abandonment. Usually these families would stay involved in their children's lives, see them almost every day, if not every day, if they can. So we're really calling people to call it something else. And again, using children who display aggression, always talking about this in the context of their complex needs, and not just say this is a controlling child, they're using control, and not explain the reasons behind those behaviors. Again, due to their complexity, that's another example of the words we can use. The idea is that we need to validate the experience of the parents, how difficult that is, how much efforts they're putting into this, validate the fear that they might be experiencing. I don't say might be experiencing, all of them are experiencing fear, actually. The fear of the future, you mentioned that, Tanya, the fear emotional and physical injury. They feel like their system's not gonna support them and their child. And validate also the tenacity of these parents. Like the parents that we're meeting are extremely committed, extremely competent, but also traumatized, and are very much in need of us helping them support their kids and support them in the journey. And like one parent said, basically we need to help them break the storm and recover from previous storms.
It's a good way to think about that tornado. If there is an actual tornado, our community comes in and helps us. Our government comes in and helps us. But with AFCCA, we tend to become more isolated, and we need to shift that. So this is another piece that we really want. We want to kind of end, we're ending soon, and we want to talk about the need for creativity. What we have absolutely come across, and again, I believe this is a lot about COVID, is systems that are stressed. If you think about the polyvagal ladder, our systems are under stress. And our professionals who work in those systems are exhausted and under stress and feeling underfunded and lots of different issues, feeling under attack. And it's really hard to be creative. It's hard for us all to be creative in those moments. We really, we're excited about the program we're starting and the knowledge that we have been developing. We really believe that collaboration, it's part of that creating a village. We need our systems to collaborate. So we really want to invite people to collaborate with us and with other systems to try to create movement in some of the needs we've actually very clearly identified. In the families that we're dealing with, we can name specific needs that are out there that are absolutely interfering with people being able to recover from these tornadoes. We do need to be solution focused, but we need to be solution focused and strength based towards families and systems. Because again, what we're seeing are, and it's funny because I don't want to be doing this either, we don't want to just be pointing out the problems with the systems, but we need to be finding those solutions. I feel like, and some people said this about COVID, you know, COVID kind of unknit so much of our society. We can re-knit it, but we can do it better with the knowledge that we've gained now. And one of the things that we're doing is creating a community of practice. So this is really important, and we really want you to hear this. And we want to know, are there people here today, people listening to this, or do you know people who would be interested in being part of our community of practice? We want to have a multi-sector awareness. We need the sectors working together. Every sector has its own knowledge base, its own expertise, and we need to share those ideas and that expertise. This will help us ensure consistency of language and messaging to everyone. It'll help AFCCA become less blamed on families and more understood. So if we can understand it, we're going to be much more effective at supporting it and changing it. One of the big things we are seeing are families getting bounced around from sector to sector, from support to support. You know, I mean, just an example, you know, police saying, no, you need to go to CAS saying, no, we can't help you. You need to go to this mental health hubs, them saying, we don't have anything. So we're seeing families getting bounced around and feeling like there is nothing out there. And I think we truly believe we can create something, but we have to be determined. We need a diverse membership, drawing from child welfare, mental health, education, justice, social work sectors. There are so many people that, I mean, even us doing these webinars for the past 3 weeks, we've been doing webinars. We've had well over 300 people sign up and attend because they understand this is a problem and they want to do something about it. So if you know of anyone who is interested in being part of our community of practice, or if you are interested, please let us know. Nancy, you get to take over here. So Nancy will give you a little bit of information on how to let us know, and then she's going to take over the slideshow from here.
Oh, thanks, Tanya. Yes, I just put in the chat an email address you can use to reach our program. So if you're interested in joining the community of practice, or if you have someone you'd like to recommend, or you just want to learn more, you can email us at afcasupport@adoptforlife.com. So it's in the chat. Next slide, please, Tanya. So we're just finishing up. But also to let you know that we do offer customized workshops. So if you have a large group that you would like to invite our wonderful clinicians, Tanya and Maud, to speak at, or if it's a group of caregivers, Jen is also a wonderful presenter. Again, you can email that same email address. It's right there on the screen. And these are just some of the different topics that we provide. All the fees are covered through the ministry that funds our program, as long as you're in Ontario. If you're outside Ontario, please still reach out. We can discuss it. Next slide, please. We do have an upcoming webinar by Nate Sheets on April 27th. Some of you may be familiar with Nate. He lives in Oregon, and he's really gifted at explaining how to de-escalate somebody, particularly somebody with a neurodevelopmental disability. And he shares it in a really simple, fact-based way. I love his videos. So the webinar is a wonderful opportunity, but you also might like to search him on the internet and just see some of his short videos. I often share them with families, with extended family members, to help equip them with some great strategies. And that's open to everybody, free. You can register with Adopt for Life as a professional. If you do, you will receive our quarterly professional newsletter, and we'll notify you of upcoming events, webinars. You can also let families know about us. So if you're supporting a family formed through adoption, kin, or customary care, please let them know about us. But there are other things on our website that you can access as a service provider or professional. We have a really good resource library that's broken down by topic, and there are all sorts of wonderful resources. But we also would love to have help from you. If you have ideas of programs or professionals that you think we should know about, please, again, reach out to that same email address and let us know. We're always looking for ideas for respite. I know we all are, but again, if we can just share our information and our resources, we're just going to build capacity to support these families experiencing aggression. Next slide. And also, we didn't really touch on it at the start, but we do have regional parent liaisons working across the province of Ontario. And so again, if you're supporting a family formed through adoption, kin, or customary care, please let them know about us, and they can be supported by peers. And then if they are experiencing AFCCA, their regional parent liaison will send them some of our program's resources and can refer them to our clinicians. And at this point, so far, we just have a couple of questions, but first of all, can one of you explain, the question was whether we support biological parents, and our funding doesn't allow for that, but could you elaborate on some ways we can still support this community?
I guess I'm unmuted, so y'all do that. I mean, I think, oh goodness, I wasn't expecting that question. You go, Nancy. You actually know the answer to this one better than I do.
Well, anybody can access the resource library, so I would direct them to the Adopt for Life site. We have a YouTube channel with all sorts of videos. So for instance, all these caregiver videos that we have recorded to do with aggression, those are all publicly available, so they can access them. Tanya and Maud did a wonderful webinar for caregivers. So again, that is public. Tanya has a webinar on there on the polyvagal approach. And also we do this training for professionals, and since we just have 1.5 clinicians, what we really need to do is build capacity to support families. So these wonderful clinicians can train more people in the community. So that's another thing you could do, is invite them to to train more professionals, mental health professionals, social workers, justice workers, so that they in turn can support families. So those are some of my ideas. Okay, I have a question. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about planning tables, single plan of care meetings, and how our team and justice workers and members of other sectors can work together at these planning tables.
So far, on our cases are composed of usually level 3 families. So most of these families have access to coordinated access. And like I said before, oftentimes I think they are redirected towards the mental health supports, and so we don't see probation officers as much. The main thing that we're seeing right now is the police going into the homes, and that's it's important that they still come, but they come in a way that's very supportive and kind of understand the background behind it, like the way we're trying to think about this issue. And of course, like what we try to do is to have all members of the team meet as regularly as possible and share a common message to the young person. I think it's incredibly important. And sometimes, I mean, everyone has their own expertise. I think probation officers, they have their own expertise and a different kind of context that we don't necessarily understand. So sometimes it's important that other sectors make us understand what their circumstances are like, what the rules they have to follow are like, so we can know how to best support that young person in the context that they're in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So even children's aid, I'm a social worker, there's rules. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that rule or protocol. And so it's always very useful when people in that system are like, okay, here's what we can do and what can you do to support. And so it's kind of like breaking up all those silos that we're in the system.
I think anytime we're getting collaboration on any level, it's incredibly important. And there is, I think anyone working in the systems, we know there needs to be a shift from our traditional ways of dealing with, you know, punishing or rewarding, those sorts of things, to supporting. I mean, I think there has been a big shift. We see that in the justice system, in the justice system, of supporting mental health differently and recognizing mental health differently. We then need more mental health supports, though, because there is definitely a lack. So I think when we collaborate, we also have more power to create that systemic change. So we're certainly willing and want to be part of any kinds of tables. As much as we have the capacity to do that, we're hoping our capacity increases. And we're just starting. We've been going just over six months. So, you know, we're starting to feel like we've got our feet under us. We know what we're doing. But there's over 400 families that we're trying to support. And that number is growing weekly, actually. So, because the more the word gets out there, the more people are coming to us and acknowledging the people that we've already been serving. They're acknowledging that AFCCA's been in their family for a while, but they haven't been talking about it. So yeah, we're hoping to continue this, but we need everyone's voices to help with it.
Thank you. So we're just coming to the end of our time. When you log off, a survey is going to pop up. If you could complete it, we'd be very grateful. It helps us understand what we're doing well and areas that we can improve. You're going to be sent a recording of today's presentation within the next week. We'll also send you a PDF of the slides and a few other resources. And once again, feel free to reach out to us at any time. AFCCA@adoptforlife.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have questions after the fact, feel free as well to reach out to us. Thank you, Tanya and Maud, as always, for a wonderful presentation. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Bye.